off.
Make your mind up. Eugenie Sage.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thank you, the Honourable Ruth Dyson. Mr Chair, it's incredibly disappointing. I don't think I have heard one contribution from any government member other than the Minister. And I think that just is symbolic of the whole process for this bill, which shambolic, the New Zealand First is saying, and certainly agree that's a term I've also used, because the Select Committee process was dominated by the Minister, and obviously either backbench members have been cowed into not speaking, or they're totally disinterested. And I think that the fact that this major bill, which amends 5 different pieces of legislation, including the Resource Management Act and the Exclusive Economic Zone and Extended Continental Shelf Act, the Conservation Act, the Reserves Act and the Public Works Act, is going through this Parliament with a majority of 1 vote. And yet the Principal Act, the RMA, went through this Parliament unanimously in 1991. And it is shameful that the Minister has pursued such a divisive course with this, has totally failed to engage with opposition parties and the concerns that we had and the suggestions that we made for changes, and has just simply steamrolled ahead with a whole lot of changes that I suspect the Property Council and its members will be very happy with because of the very permissive provisions around subdivision, which meet their interests, and with the provisions which undermine the public's right to actually have a say and help contribute to well-informed decisions, that we are passing, well, the government is passing this legislation with a 1 vote. And the risk there, and the very palpable risk, is that the new government, come September, will pass legislation that completely overturns this bill. So we have flip-flop lawmaking because the Minister, even though he talks all the time about collaborative processes, fails to engage in any collaboration around our major environmental laws. Schedule 1 of this bill has a whole prescriptive process around how council should engage in collaborative processes, yet the Minister doesn't seem to have read that, has certainly not applied it to 1 section of the development of this bill, by just completely steamrolling it through. And endorse the comments of Chris Farfoy in terms of the Māori Party has given the Minister and the government the numbers it needs to pass this legislation, and yet it has failed to recognise that the opportunities for iwi and hapu, other than through the iwi participation arrangements, to participate in normal resource consent decisions have been shafted by this bill. And the Māori Party has failed to recognise that the supplementary order paper in Marama Fox's name only deals with crops, and that doesn't cover ryegrass, and potentially it may not cover trees, which Scion has been experimenting with genetic modification of pine trees. So, Mr Chair, there is no assurance that councils will be able to continue to prevent areas having GMOs established in them through things like ryegrass and tree crops, because the bill has only got a requirement around constraining the Minister's regulation-making powers around GMO crops, not around GMO pasture or GMO trees. So the Māori Party has given up a huge amount and claiming that its SOP justifies that. Minister, this legislation will be unwound. It is a bad bill that goes to the heart of the principles of the RMA and the EEZ, and we are campaigning in the next few months to get into government and ensure that we have a major review of the RMA, that we continue with the principles that are there in Part 2, but we don't have all this undermining of good decision-making by cutting out the public and increasing the Minister's powers to dictate to councils and to override local democracy.
Dennis O'Rourke.